Hey guys, welcome to part 11 of Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving by Mr. Peter Walker. We're continuing on with self-mothering grows self-compassion. I'm actually going to take it back a little bit. Self-mothering and self-fathering. An important yin-yang dynamic of reparenting involves balancing self-mothering and self-fathering. When a child's mothering needs are adequately met, self-compassion is installed at the core of her being. When the same is true of her fathering needs, self-protection also becomes deeply embedded. Self-compassion is the domicile of recovery, and self-protection is its foundation. When self-compassion is sufficiently established as a home base to return to in difficult times, an urge to be self-protective naturally arises from it. Living in the world without access to these primal instincts of survival is truly terrifying. We advance our recovery process immeasurably when we commit to remothering and refathering ourselves. I encourage you now to commit to becoming an unshakable source of compassion and protection for yourself. Self-mothering grows self-compassion. The most essential task of self-mothering is building a deeply felt sense that we are lovable and deserved to be loved. Self-mothering is the practice of loving and accepting the inner child in all phases of his mental, emotional, and physical experience. If inner child is a problematic concept for any reason, you can imagine nurturing the developmentally arrested part of yourself. Self-mothering is based on the precept that unconditional love is every child's birthright. Recovering from the loss of unconditional love is problematic. Not getting enough of it as a child was the greatest loss we had. Sadly, this loss can never be completely remedied because unconditional love is only appropriate and developmentally helpful during the first 2 years or so of life. After this time, the toddler has to begin to learn that human love comes with conditions. Although love still needs to be copious at this time, the child must be gently shown the behaviors like hitting, biting, and breaking things are not acceptable. The period of conditional love has begun and is successfully guided via a very gradual increase in learning about necessary and healthy limits and rules. The toddler who receives good enough parenting learns relatively easily to survive the very gradually diminishing supply of unconditional love. During this time, she learns little by little that other people also have rights and needs. Her absolute entitlement to gratification is coming to an end, and the needs of her parents will not always be forfeited to accommodate her. Once again, psychological health is based on having about 2 years of this no questions asked entitlement to unconditional love. It is normal, healthy narcissism that Freud described as his, quote, majesty the baby, end quote. Serious problems occur, however, when the toddler does not begin to learn that there are limits to his original entitlement. If there are no limits for too long, then the journey towards adult narcissism begins. On the other hand, if there are too many limits too soon, the matrix of trauma begins to form. Enlightened parents introduce limits slowly but surely. They do it at such a rate that by the time the child reaches adolescence, he can balance satisfying his needs with helping his intimates to satisfy theirs. He learns to be sharing and reciprocal, a developmental task that is essential to keeping intimacy alive in his life. Complex PTSD is a syndrome of the dearth of unconditional love, or what the great therapist Carl Rogers called, quote, unconditional positive regard, end quote. Complex PTSD can also occur when unconditional love is shut off in all or nothing way in early childhood. Some parents can shower love on babies, but as soon as the child begins toddling around and expressing a will of her own, they become severely punishing and rejecting. The limits of unconditional love. The terrible absence of love, or its abrupt premature termination, is extremely painful, and its loss is very difficult to address. We cannot help desperately wanting the unconditional love we were so unfairly deprived of, but we cannot, as adults, expect others to supply our unmet early entitlement needs. The one exception to this is therapy, but that, of course, is usually only 1 or 2 hours a week. Miraculously, I have seen the unconditional love, positive regard of the therapist be enough on numerous occasions to significantly repair the damage of not being parentally loved. And when it is enough, the therapist's consisting caring facilitates the awakening of a developmentally arrested need to hold yourself with enough unconditional love. I think that's a really good point that needs to be stressed. It takes years and years for long-term survivors of childhood sexual abuse to come to terms, decades, if not half their lives sometimes. And when they first start comprehending, everything gets very chaotic because your mind has been keeping it from you, as it were, in order to survive for all of your life since the abuse started. So to take those walls down and look at it from a different perspective, I think does take specialists, therapists in the field. And that's important to point out. Because of the developmental trauma that occurs, it really, really does take a professional to help a survivor begin to comprehend what happened to them. Most survivors, myself included, well, let's just say that as hard as the last video was, I watched it twice over before I posted it because I had said so much. And in the rewatching, I realized that this was one of the only times where I'd spoken it frankly and with the allowance of several deep emotions that I often refuse to look at. And I was able to do it without over emotion, without losing control. And that made me really proud of myself, because I know how much it's taken to get to this point, to be able to speak the truth and do it courageously, without fear and without tears, to do it calmly. It motivated me to continue tonight, and as often as I can until we finish this. 2, 3, 4 times a week, I don't care. I am determined to finish this work because I believe that once I have the courage and perseverance to do so, a new me will finally be allowed to emerge without the shadows of dysfunction debilitating me into my greatest possible ease, joy, and glory of a life, which I'm entitled to. And I'm the only one that can do it. No one else can. Same for every survivor. But yes, at the beginning, we definitely need help, professional help. And I don't think there's any way around that. Unless you have a very self-aware, very educated, very aware survivor. But at that point, doesn't that make them an expert? So yes, don't try to do it by yourself. There's too many things you don't know that I still don't know. Developmental trauma it goes deep. But with professional help, you can start comprehending and understanding new ways of thinking and responding. You're given tools through understanding and through exercises and through, well, years of that. I believe finishing the work all the way through, processing all the emotions, whether people want to hear them or not. It's important, and I think it's valuable to do it publicly so that perhaps a movement can begin, a movement to stop childhood sexual abuse. Because this should never have happened to anybody, ever. We survivors often struggle with managing our understandable but unrealistic yearnings to receive permanent unconditional love from a friend or a partner. Like the toddler, we eventually have to accept the limits of adult love. This is especially true in romance, where the intoxication of unconditional love rarely lasts for more than a year. Around this time, partners inevitably begin to feel some frustration with each other because of differences in their individual needs. Nonetheless, romantic love can be a significant source of therapeutic, unconditional love, especially when it survives the inevitability of some disappointments. Susan Campbell's Couple's Journey is a pragmatic, research-based book on how to reap more intimacy out of normal relationship disappointments. Inner child work. Let us return to the concept of self-mothering. As mother to ourselves, we commit to increasing our self-compassion and unconditional positive regard. Self-mothering is a resolute refusal to indulge in self-hatred and self-abandonment. It proceeds from the realization that self-punishment is counterproductive. It is enhanced by the understanding that patience and self-encouragement are more effective than self-judgment and self-rejection in achieving recovery. You can enhance your self-mothering skills by imaginatively creating a safe place in your heart where your inner child and your present time self are always welcome. Consistent tenderness towards yourself welcomes the child into the adult body you now inhabit and shows him that it is now a nurturing place, protected by a warm and powerful adult. Self-mothering can be enhanced by correcting the critic's negative messages with healing words that the child in all likelihood never heard from his parents. A client of mine once shared this pearl of wisdom with me. Quote, "Thoughts, just mere thoughts, are as powerful as electric batteries, as good for you as sunlight is, or as bad for you as poison." End quote. Here, then, are some useful messages for nurturing the growth of your self-compassion and self-esteem. I recommend that you imagine speaking them to your inner child, especially when you are suffering with a flashback. Reparenting affirmations. I am so glad you were born. You are a good person. I love who you are, and I'm doing my best to always be on your side. You can come to me whenever you're feeling hurt or bad. You do not have to be perfect to get my love and protection. All of your feelings are okay with me. I am always glad to see you. It is okay for you to be angry, and I won't let you hurt yourself or others when you are. You can make mistakes. They are your teachers. You can know what you need and ask for help. You can have your own preferences and tastes. You are a delight in my eyes. You can choose your own values. You can pick your own friends, and you don't have to like everyone. You can sometimes feel confused and ambivalent and not know all the answers. I am very proud of you. If this is the dialogue in our head that becomes our reality, then we don't need anything on the outside of us to keep us at peace and motivated. You'll have all that love within yourself, for yourself. And once you're that healthy, that self-aware, that leaves so much of you to be able to healthily and appropriately interact in a positive light to the entirety of the world around you. You can truly shine and do so with ease and joy and glory. Self-fathering and time machine rescue operations. Many abandoned children enter adulthood feeling that the world is a dangerous place where they are ill-equipped to defend themselves. While self-mothering focuses primarily on healing the wounds of neglect, self-fathering heals the wounds of being helpless, to protect yourself from parental abuse and by extension from other abusive authoritative figures. Self-fathering aims at building assertiveness and self-protection. It includes learning to effectively confront external and/or internal abuse, as well as standing up for the adult child's rights. As described in Toolbox 2 of Chapter 16, many survivors benefit greatly from classes and books on assertiveness training. One of my favorite self-fathering exercises is the time machine rescue operation. I have used it to help myself and to help clients. With clients, I use it to model a process for fighting off the overwhelming sense of helplessness that often accompanies emotional flashbacks. This is a version of the time machine rescue operation that I use with myself as well as with my clients. I tell my inner child that if time travel is ever possible, I will travel back into the past and put a stop to my parents' abusiveness. In the course of this, I say things like, I'll call 911. I'll call CPS on them. I will grab their arms and pin them behind their backs the second they try to strike you. I will muffle them with a gag so they can't scream at you or even mumble their criticism. I'll put bags over their heads so they can't frown or glare at you or roll their eyes at you. I'll send them to bed without dessert. I'll do anything you want me to do to protect you. Such imaginary often provides me with an exit out of fear and out of shame, and sometimes even makes my inner child laugh in delight. I sometimes finish this exercise by telling my inner child I would also report my parents to the authorities so they would be sent to counseling to learn how to be a better parent. Or I say that if I could, I would take him back to live with me in the future before all those horrible things could happen to him. I remind him that he is, in fact, lives in the present with me now, where I will always do my best to protect him. We now have a powerful body, greater skills of self-protection, and access to allies and legal system that will protect us. I hope the legal system and CPS in the very near future, I hope that they get whatever assistance they need to be better at follow through with such cases of childhood abuse. As an adult, I went to the police station. I was 36 or 37. I went to CPS in regards to my brother and tried to get the children interviewed to see if they had any signs of sexual abuse, and if they did, to have my past experience be collaborate and for them to investigate. And I made a police report, and I said I wanted to press charges, but nothing happened. I know a lot of rules have changed in the last handful of years in regards to allowing survivors to have 50 years or more, something like that, to be able to put in police reports for their abusers. But right before that law changed is when I put in my police report, so I guess he gets to get away with it. And I will be left to do this work and figure out what energy I can transmute from all of this and bring it to good. And I'm sure I will, because why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't all adult survivors that can get through this work not work together to help prevent this from continuing to happen to children all over the world, all the time? When the recovery consistently welcomes his inner child in every aspect of his being, the child feels incredibly safe and becomes more and more alive and self-expressive. I really adore that, because I recognize that as I continue to heal, the restraints do fall off my soul, and I am able to express myself and feel more alive. Better late than never, I say. As he experiences his adult self consistently rising to his defense, he will feel safe enough to begin accessing his innate vitality, playfulness, curiosity, and spontaneity. Reparenting by committee. Reparenting at its best is a yin-yang dynamic that balances the mutually enhancing process of reparenting by others and self-reparenting. Reparenting is sometimes needs to be initiated and modeled by someone else, such as a therapist, a sponsor, a kind friend, or supportive group to show us how to self-reparent ourselves. Alternatively, many survivors, by the way, I just want to point out, I tried therapist through Kaiser Permanente in Riverside County, but it was a racket. They either wanted to get me on pills, would put more diagnoses on me, or just a lot of pills, really. And the ones that I did have the courage to go talk to and start opening up to, they weren't skilled in childhood sexual abuse. That was clear. So the majority of the therapy that I received was actually from an incredible amount of research into really well-known authors of sexual abuse survivors, like the Courage to Heal book, for example, or the Partners book, To a Courage to Heal, which I actually learned an excessive amount from, because I was able to see from the perspective of the person that I was, the partner, as it were. And that outside look actually helped me realize even more quickly how I needed to continue to get help to figure this out and work through it, so that I could not act irrationally and all these other ways that I was acting from trauma responses. I wanted to be able to be a healthy person, not just for myself, but for others, the people that had to deal with me. Alternatively, many survivors instinctively initiate reparenting by others via entering what one of my clients described as the community of books. Yes, they receive reparenting from authors who encourage them to value and support themselves. Alice was such a survivor. Her family traumatized her during childhood so thoroughly that she quickly learned that being vulnerable around others was dangerous, foolish, and totally out of the question. Yet the urge to get the support and help she was so unfairly deprived of worked its way back into her awareness via a strong attraction to self-help books. By reading a great deal of psychology, she eventually found enough help that she began to think that there might be a kind, safe, and helpful person out there in the flesh, and entered into some very helpful therapy. Chapter 15, Bibliotherapy, contains my favorite recommendations for therapeutic self-help books. I too went through a long, gradual process of reading and attending lectures before I was able to take the frightening and embarrassing plunge into therapy, where, as stated earlier, I was fortunate enough to find a good enough therapist to take my relational healing to the next level. Therapy allowed me to internalize and mimic my therapist's consistent and reliable stance of being on my side. This in turn led me to gravitate towards safer and more truly intimate friendships. I have seen this same result with numerous clients and friends. Eventually, I achieved my first earned secure attachment outside of my therapy, and was subsequently ready to let go of therapy as the only place where I could have deep and meaningful connections. I believe the need to have mothering and fathering type support from others is a lifelong need and not just limited to childhood. Fortunately, I am now blessed many years later to experience a multi-leveled form of reparenting by others, which I call reparenting by committee. A conceptualized reparenting by committee as a circle of friends that has varied layers and levels of intimacy. The inner circle of my reparenting committee includes my 5 closest friends. I think of this inner circle as friends with whom nothing is too vulnerable or too taboo to talk about. My wife, a therapist friend, my exercise buddy, and 2 members of a long-term men's group that I was in are in this circle. This circle also has an outer layer of people who would be inner if circumstances allowed me to see them more. Outside this orb are levels of succeedingly less intimate, yet still meaningful circles of relationship. The next circle out is intimates who I rarely see anymore, but who are and have shared enough intimacy with me in the past that I know that I now draw comfort from imagining them caring for me in the present. My deceased grandmother is in this circle, as are 3 of my former therapists, a couple of my army buddies, old high school and college friends, and my 4 best friends from the 10 years I lived in Australia. The next circle out from this consists of my nurse practitioners, the body worker I occasionally see, some therapists, colleagues, and the wise old school librarian who helps me pick books for my son to read. The next circle out from this are friends I play sports with, parents of my son's friends, and people in my neighborhood with whom my contact is not especially vulnerable, but with whom there is easy chemistry that adds to my general overall sense of belonging. Belonging. There's a loaded word. And the final circle is occasional strangers who from time to time I am graced to have easy and comforting interactions with. I wonder if they're angels. I also know various survivors whose effective recovery practices have similarly rewarded them with enough portions of love from a variety of others that their childhood starvation for help and support is significantly assuaged. It means to make less severe. ASSUAGED. And like me, their committees started with the first person they had good enough intimacy with. Counting yourself, this then is a committee of 2, which with grace can then build slowly, one friendship at a time. All right, guys. For part 12, we will be reading the Tao of Self-Relating and Relating to Others. See you soon.